We are live. We are live. And today I have been assured that the miscellaneous tax bill will be voted out of appropriations without meddling in our jurisdiction. Now, once they do that, we will vote out the budget without meddling in their jurisdiction. We'll see how well that works. So we are going to start with miscellaneous tax. Administrator, all right, we have already voted that out, but Rebecca, here, okay. You had some concerns about something in this?
Yeah, well, I'm prepared to talk about a timing.
That's
timing
what I,
issue.
yeah, that's what I understood, because this will have to be a floor amendment.
Sure. Yeah, happy to kick us off. I'm Sam Brown, Deputy Commissioner. This is my first time wearing my cool go to the legislature vest.
Yeah, that's
Where's it cool? See that?
wow. We do. Want your bench?
Yeah, so one of the components in the miscellaneous tax bill is kind of like brought into this conformity package is a policy to decouple from the federal, like some preferential federal treatment for qualified small business stock.
Yes.
At the federal level, this is like up to previously up to $10 million, but now expanded by HR 1 up to $15 million can be excluded at the federal level if you hold stock that meets like certain criteria. This exclusion is taken by entrepreneurs, founders, early investors in companies. It has to be a small business, which I think is like 75 million or smaller is the federal measure for small. And that was also increased by HR 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And so the conformity package in the miscellaneous tax bill decouples from the federal treatment, but goes further than just decoupling from the expansion in HR 1. It actually decouples from the entire underlying treatment. So this federally excluded income will become taxable in Vermont, when this becomes law. The timing of that change was kind of packaged with all the conformity stuff as retroactive to tax year 25. This is and I think the retroactive timing for much of the conformity package just makes a lot of sense because you want to, kind of provide a smooth experience for taxpayers, for the department. It like makes a lot of sense in most cases, but this is like something new. It's kind of like a new for Vermont policy. It's not really part of goes beyond just the conformity discussion, and for many reasons, but administratively for sure, I think it'd be really beneficial to have this start a little more prospectively for tax year 26. I'll acknowledge that this is still a little retroactive because we're in the middle of tax year 26 right now, but no one's filed a return yet, whereas tax year 25, the filing date's already passed for timely filed returns and payments too. So that's, it's like deeply in the past, these retroactive provisions. So, so administrative, and the reason why I'm bringing this up now, despite all the, kind of like intersecting fiscal impacts is because, because of some weird timing with the dynamics of this retroactive provision, this could actually be implemented for tax year 26 without changing the fiscal note. This is, we have Pat here who can say more about the why, but I think the fiscal note was actually done pretty thoughtfully and correctly acknowledging that, we have a big retroactive tax change like this, which I believe this is going to, in its first year of implementation, would raise about $2.4 million, this decoupling from the qualified small business stock. If this happens, if this, continues to be a retroactive provision for tax year 25, the tax year that's passed, we've already gone through the April filing deadline with no taxpayers, knowing that this activity would retroactively be taxable. And so, when this becomes law, we're talking like maybe like a matter of like 6 weeks or something before the fiscal year changes. So we're not gonna, like realistically, the taxpayers in the department aren't gonna be able to like magically realize all this income. It's gonna take a little digging for the first year. Certainly in a retroactive first year. So because the revenue is booked that way and it's not booked until fiscal 27, we could move the implementation of this policy to tax year 26. And with the benefits being giving taxpayers a heads up, that this is coming, giving our department time to actually like map the federal fields to let us administer this cleanly. It'd be a very manual process for us to track down this tax year 25 money. And I should say that generally 2 and 3 years after any given tax year, we get really solid comprehensive data from the IRS that lets us do a number of automated audit and compliance programs. This would get scooped up in that, no problem, but that's 2 and 3 years down the road. For an implementation in tax year 26, we could actually be a little more proactive and make sure we have the federal return fields mapped, which means that like when we get an electronic submission of a federal return along with our state return, we can in our system, proactively do the development work to map those fields and actually proactively create some return rules. So like when the return comes in the door, our system's checking like, oh, did you have this qualified small business stock income? Or is it being reported on the proper Vermont form line? If not, we can take it back or have a taxpayer services colleague do an adjustment.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I'm following your argument, but I'm not following which part of the bill, and it's not. Is there a draft?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Of the thing?
I'm also like,
Yeah.
So I think this is, let me look at our colleagues here.
Section 55
Thank you.
Section 55.
and
Oh, it's one of the really long, just things that just
Yes.
references federal law.
it's the one that references federal law at section 1202.
Okay. Okay. And I mean, I guess it's the question for Pat, not you, but this doesn't have like this to look at that.
Pat Goodington, Joint Fiscal Office. I think Rebecca talked through some of the like cash flow and how they would actually need to go about recouping this money if it's not, if we don't adjust. So if we don't adjust the effective date, how they actually go about collecting it, just looking at the calendar.
So what the way it is in the bill right now is it's supposed to take effect for tax year 25, which basically happened 2 weeks ago or whatever. And your proposal is to make it for tax year 26, which would be this year, but next April.
Right.
When most of it's due.
I mean, my feebly held dream would be for there magically to like emerge $2.4 million from elsewhere, so we can stay linked up to the federal code in this
You
space.
should have paper dreams, but.
Okay, it's like more of like a medium level dream of mine, but I think I'm coming with a reasonable administrative proposal, assuming that policy decision has been made by this body and this committee. You passed this out already.
But it would have a $2.4 million impact.
No.
That's what I'm confused at.
No, sorry, that was saying if you eliminate it. If you allow it to stay linked up to the Fed.
Oh,
which is
I see.
always our preference.
Okay, I see. But
And
given
it's
that we
all
are decoupling, it would just,
So
it would not have.
like practically speaking, this will result in less revenue being collected for sales that happened in that calendar year. The reason it's not changing what's in the note there is, I think with the system that the department currently has in place, it's going to be a big lift. And by all intents and purposes, maybe not quite totally possible to be comprehensive about, up in compliance with it. And just to know, when I say compliance, it's not willful non-compliance, it's more of an educational thing. So, and Rebecca talked a little bit about the audit information we'll get later on. So it's really, there's not a practical way to think about spreading that money we're not anticipating to come this fiscal year, over the next few years. So when looking at the note, it does in some ways represent somewhat of a conservative estimate. So with the thinking about when this money would actually technically come in, we have no good way of saying. And also no way of knowing like how close to 100% compliance you get to.
Mhm.
So for a lot of those reasons, it doesn't change the tables in the fiscal note. It doesn't change sort of how this construct with all the interconnectedness between the budget and the T-bill and the ed fund. So
Okay.
when you're thinking about this change from that perspective, this effective date change would not affect that construct.
Because the line in your table 2 in your, you have this memorized, I'm sure, Pat. Table 2, it's decoupled from qualified business stock gain exclusion. That's the one.
That's that, yeah.
And it's 2.8 million, have it booked in FY 27.
Yeah, so that will be
That's why it doesn't have.
this effective date moving forward 1 year, which also, allows time to set up the system. That's when we sort of felt more comfortable that we'd actually start seeing revenue that we could potentially count on.
Got it. Okay.
And
Thank you. That's helpful.
in actuality, all of these numbers are estimates.
That's absolutely true.
I mean, depending on the markets and what's going on, we could be right on the money. We could be way high or way low, and we won't know, like most tax revenue, what it's going to be. It's an informed estimate.
And practically speaking, it's gonna be applying to a very small number of taxpayers, so there's gonna be some inherent volatility from that perspective.
And Senator Chipman, this answers
It
the
does.
concern of your constituents. Okay. Any questions? This will have to be a floor amendment because we don't have miscellaneous. So I need to get that drafted. And then I can, I'm presenting bill, so I can present the floor amendment. And we can do a straw poll. Is there anyone opposed to doing this? Okay, no one's opposed.
It's a backwards job.
Then I'll just present it on the floor and say, you've heard it.
I really appreciate that.
Yes, it's a technical fix that will allow the tax department to function with sanity and allow the taxpayers to comply without having to go back to, last year.
Yeah, my expectation is this will feel much more fair also from a taxpayer perspective. I mean, I understand we're already in the middle of 2026 and folks may have already made some decisions, but 2025 being completely over and having the tax book closed, more deeply retroactive than I think necessary in this case.
Okay,
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'll be standing by for questions that and community members have for that amendment.
Bill, I was just told has come out
This one is tax.
miscellaneous tax. Miscellaneous tax, we should never do those two bills together. Miscellaneous tax is out of appropriations. Without unaltered. So that means it'll be on notice tomorrow and on the floor. The presentation on Tuesday, so I can get an updated section by section and an amendment. I will greatly appreciate it. We will go forward. Okay, thank you. All right, we are going back to 9:40. Yeah. Okay, we do have the appropriations bill on. For vote. So we will keep going. We are going back to the transportation bill. And we have Jeff Marcus. Jeff is here. Come on up. Okay, one of the other add-ons. And I don't know, Senator Perchwood, I mean, asked him, since he made the amendment to add this on. And basically, Said he could tell us why he added it, but not why it might be a good idea. So, we are just trying to get some information. This was apparently added on late in the game. And the floor is yours. Just introduce yourself for the record and tell us who you represent.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time today. I did prepare remarks and I shared it with the committee assistant, so you should have it. I'll read those through these and then answer any questions that you might have. Chairman Clemens and members of the Senate Finance Committee, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Bartley. I am the Director of Innovation and Marketing at the Patrick Leahy Burlington International Airport. In addition to innovation and marketing, I handle airline negotiations and business development at the airport as well. I do want to start by saying sincerely, we are grateful for this committee, the transportation committees, the administration, the Agency of Transportation, and all the members of the General Assembly, particularly one from Fairfax, who is my wife. The collaborative spirit amongst all of us matters. It is part of what makes the Vermont aviation industry successful. It is in that spirit of why I'm here today. We are not just here as partners and joint stewards of travel, transportation, and tourism in Vermont. We are here because we care deeply about getting this right and because we believe Vermont's aviation future is a shared interest. In summary, we want to be a part of the solution. What we are asking for today is simply that the Senate Finance Committee remove the 2% jet fuel surcharge from H944 because we believe this particular mechanism, added without industry input, carries meaningful risk to our airport success, growth, and momentum. I want to begin my notes with good news because I think it's important for the context of everything that I'm going to say. Leahy BTV is not just an airport, it's an economic engine for the entire state. Our most recent economic impact assessment tells a remarkable story of growth. Since 2018, we have seen a 14.4% increase in total jobs supported by the airport, bringing that total to 5,645 Vermonters whose livelihoods are tied to aviation at our airport. Total payroll has grown by 91% to $325.4 million in annual income. The combined airport regional value, including economic output and existing replacement value, now stands at $1.9 billion, an over 80% increase in over 8 years. Annually, we generate $1 billion in economic output, and the state and local taxes generated by the airport have grown 81% from $34.5 million in 2018 to $62.5 million today. That growth is not accidental. It is the result of strategic investments, partnerships, entrepreneurial drive, and a commitment to meeting the evolving demands of Vermont's economy and tourism sector. That foundation, that is a foundation we are building on, and the foundation that is genuinely at risk if we make Vermont a significantly more expensive fuel market as it relates to aviation. In late March, we opened a new terminal, a transformational upgrade that has been years in the making, funded in large part by a $34 million congressional allocation. The new terminal includes 4 new jet bridges that can accommodate larger aircraft, significantly expanded passenger waiting areas, and providing modern amenities. And it was built, we're very proud about this, built with sustainability in mind. Mass timber, geothermal is heating and cooling the building, and future solar arrays are part of this project as well. NPR ran a national story covering the opening just 3 weeks ago, noting that Leahy BTV is actively positioning itself to attract a greater share of our regional market or catchment area. Currently, only half of those travelers choose Burlington, Vermont, meaning 1.5 million flyers are still choosing other airports. Our goal is to change that. We want our local dollars to stay local. We are actively engaged in conversations with approximately a dozen airlines about expanding service. And this summer, we will reach the second highest level of commercial service at Leahy BTV. And we now have more direct flights than at any point in our airport's history with 19 destinations, including Atlanta, Charleston, Charlotte, Chicago, Detroit, Denver, Fort Myers, Minneapolis, Newark, JFK, LaGuardia, Orlando, Philadelphia, Raleigh, Durham, Tampa, Washington, D.C., and Washington, Dulles. And starting May 23rd, new nonstop service on United to Houston. And there is more to come. I'll add the national context for small hub airports like ours has rarely been more favorable. Large hub airports face growing congestions, a shortage of air traffic controllers, and projections of continued passenger growth still, all of which will create an opening for a well-positioned smaller airport like ours to attract more service. Aviation analysts have noted that airlines build networks to serve the most profitable routes, of course, which means enticing airlines to spread their routes to smaller hubs is not an easy sell. It requires Vermont to be competitive on every metric that airlines evaluate. Cost, especially related to commodities, is one of the most important metrics. The FAA projects activity at large hub airports will still grow at about twice as fast as small hub airports over the next 2 decades. Even as those hubs face real congestions and the shortages, that creates an opening for airport like ours. We're not just a Vermont story, we're part of a national conversation about how smaller airports can take pressure off of places like Boston, who we currently lose about 35% of our market to still, and carry more of the load. The demand is there and it is not going away. The aviation industry is dynamic and highly competitive. As we manage the second busiest airfield in New England in terms of operations, we are also working to meet the needs of our region's business, tourism economy, and general aviation community. As amended, this bill would add a permanent 2% surcharge on jet fuel on top of Vermont's existing 6% sales tax and South Burlington's 1% local option tax. At Leahy VTV, that would mean the total tax rate on aviation jet fuel would be 9%. It would make it the 3rd highest in the nation. This is in addition to the region already having the highest average price per gallon in the country on Jet A, 100LL, and SAF, which is sustainable aviation fuel, which we are very proud that we were the first airport in New England to pass. For more context, Maine taxes jet fuel at about 4 cents a gallon. New Hampshire and New York are each around half a penny. Some states don't tax at all. We will be less competitive with such high fuel costs. That gap matters because aviation fuel demand is price sensitive. Airline and operators compare fuel costs across markets, and when prices diverge, they adjust, sometimes by tankering, which is carrying extra fuel specifically to avoid buying at expensive locations, or in some cases, not transporting the fuels to Leahy VTV at all. A higher rate applied to a shrinking volume base doesn't necessarily produce more revenue, it can produce less. Last year, just over 2 million was collected in jet fuel taxes, down from 2.7 million in 2022, telling a story about global fuel prices normalizing after an unusually high period, not about declining activity. As I've stated, employments and the size of aircraft have never been more stable at Leahy VTV, and they're growing. Case in point, last October, we had over 160,000 passengers total come and go through Leahy VTV. We have never hit that mark before in any month in the history of the airport. It was a 6% growth year over year, and we are now projecting the 2nd busiest year at Leahy VTV in our history. This new tax, it risks the momentum and growth we are seeing at Leahy VTV because this proposed surcharge is substantially targeted at Leahy VTV users, passengers, airlines, and general aviation. We do find it unfair to continue to tax our users to offset the cost of the transportation bill. Additionally, the vast majority who end up bearing the final burden of the tax will not be users of the other state airports and will not benefit from this. There's also something worth understanding about this tax, how this tax actually flows. The legal taxpayer isn't the airline. It's the fuel distributor upstream in the supply chain. By the time fuel reaches the airport, the tax is already embedded in the price. Airlines pay it, but indirectly, and then it is passed on to the end user, the passenger. Operationally, and in most cases, the FBO is not selling the fuel itself. They are providing into-plane service. The airline typically owns the fuel through its own supplier contract, and then, in our case, Heritage Aviation charges a service fee for handling, storage, and delivery. The tax and the FBO service component are entirely separate. We now know Vermont receives between 2 and 3 million annually in aviation fuel tax revenue, depending on the cost of the fuel. A lion's share of that revenue is generated at Leahy VTV. Yet our annual state appropriation is capped at $500,000. These funds are vital, and we are deeply grateful for the state's investment. We are not asking for an increase in the cap at this time, but we have made the transportation committees in the House and the Senate aware that in the future we will be advocating for an increase. However, as requested in February in the House Transportation and mentioned in the Senate Transportation Committee yesterday, we respectfully request that the committee ensure this allocation is not restricted solely to capital matching grants as part of the Airport Improvement Program or AIP entitlement funds, but instead adjust the statute to align with federal statute, specifically 49 U.S. Code section 47133, that allows funds to be used for either capital or operating costs of the airport. Why is this critical? We are allowed to bank the AIP entitlement funds, and we may not draw down on the appropriation for a couple of years. The reason for this is we are planning a very large environmental protection project that will allow us to recycle the glycol, the de-icing chemicals on the airplanes, and we'll recycle it and we'll be able to reuse it. This additional burden placed on us by the state, as we understand it, occurred as part of the 2018 transportation bill. As far as we can tell, no other appropriation from aviation jet fuel revenues in Vermont are as restrictive as they are at our airports. We are strongly advocating for legislative language that removes the restriction. And it is our interpretation that if we do bank the AIP entitlement funds as allowed, the state would not appropriate the $500,000 reinvestment from the aviation jet fuel taxes generated at our airport. In conclusion, this simple 2% surcharge that is believed to be able to generate $600,000 a year is not simple. It's not guaranteed to generate more revenue. It might cost less revenue for various reasons outlined above. H944 would direct the revenue to state transportation aviation related infrastructure. While it's not clear whether that revenue will be used, what that revenue will be used for, and who ultimately is responsible for paying for the tax, including the passengers. We respectfully ask that you remove the aviation fuel charge language. I understand the Senate Transportation Committee is moving forward with an amendment on the floor. We do feel it is better to resolve these things in committee though, which is why I'm here. And more broadly, we want to be in these conversations earlier. In the future, if there are ideas about how to fund transportation, give us a call. We'll show up. Our goal is simple: to ensure that the Vermont's primary aviation gateway has the flexibility and support necessary to continue driving economic growth, supporting thousands of jobs, and connecting our state to the world. Vermont aviation is in a great place right now, and we'd love to keep it that way. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I have a question. It's not necessarily related exactly to this, but I heard this morning actually that the federal administration's cutting another 372 million from rural airports. I'm assuming Burlington is not considered a rural airport.
Well, I don't believe we're considered a small hub airport, and I have not heard of any impact to us on that.
Probably more like nap.
Well, I heard Rutland is gonna be affected.
Yeah. But we're bigger than that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Jeff. I hear you loud and clear about the things that are in the current transportation bill, but you mentioned something from previous years and I couldn't follow you. We're talking fast.
I'm sorry, I didn't do that right.
That's okay. So
I'm very passionate about this.
I've understood. I'm trying to find it in your testimony. I never read the testimony, but what could you?
So in 2018, as part of the transportation bill, there's other conversations and personalities involved with this. When they capped our contribution at 500,000, it used to be a lot more. They also said you have to use this
Your
500,000.
contribution to what?
The state gives us 500,000.
I see. Okay. Your appropriation. Okay.
Used to be a million, I think now they cut it to 500,000 about 8 years ago.
Yep.
Okay.
And with that, there was also the restriction that those funds had to be used to match AIP grants. So when we get an entitlement from the FAA, they'll cover 90%, we have to cover 10%. And so the legislation said we have to use these funds to cover that 10%.
I see.
Where we are going to be banking it for this glycol project. And so therefore the state would not appropriate those funds, and we need those because it frees up other funds for operating replacements, et cetera.
So you want us to get rid of the language that says that it has to match the federal funds? Is that what you're asking?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Because the federal law, as it relates to jet fuel, says those taxes have to be reinvested in the aviation industry. And because the state has an aviation program, a majority of those funds are taken and are used for the state airports.
Yeah.
And that's where our $500,000 allocation comes. But the federal law very specifically states it can be used for operating or capital costs.
Okay.
And so we want to match federal law.
I see. Okay. That's helpful. I understand.
Okay, so consider that.
Well, that
might be a little bit
I
outside.
was gonna say, is that our jurisdiction to do that?
It's a gray area. And at this point, we're gonna mess in this bill enough in our area. I would like to give transportation a chance to look at that. I don't think it's critical that it be done right now, is it? It could be done next year.
I think so. We will push it very hard on that next year because we are gonna start making.
Did you talk to the transportation committee this year?
Yes, both the House and the Senate.
And they didn't do it?
Honestly, we went to the House, is a little too late in the game. When we
Okay,
started.
but the Senate didn't put anything.
I talked to them yesterday for the first time.
Okay, so
After the bill left their committee.
yeah, it's late in the game.
But on the bill that we have before us, it's just essentially removing section 44.
Right, there's a tax on jet fuel. Taxes are in our domain. It was added on. I think because they were trying to raise money anywhere. But given the state of the cost of jet fuel right now, and especially the shakiness of a lot of airlines, and the rising costs, I don't think it would be helpful to add a cost, an additional cost. This just like it wouldn't be really helpful to raise the gasoline tax this year.
If I could give an example,
Yeah.
Breeze Airways, which is a low cost carrier, they are doing very well at our airport. They try to keep their costs at a minimum. They fly the largest planes and they go the furthest. And this will severely impact their ability to operate. And we are in conversations with them about expanding service, and that will not occur.
Okay.
Would it also drive more shorter hops, so they might avoid fueling up in Burlington?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's called anchoring.
I don't support this language and happy to strip it.
Thanks, Jeff. Agreed with taking it out, but did you guys run the numbers on what portion of that 600,000 would be Burlington?
We don't have a strong ability to find out what the, even with the 2 million that was collected last year, because there's so few payers.
It can't.
Lion's share is going to be commercial service at Lady VTV. I would guess 95 to 90%.
It's tax department, if it's fewer than 10 or 20, they can't tell you because then you could figure out who it was.
Yeah. Cool.
This is just a small number, so we'd all be trying to appropriate. And that's taxpayer confidentiality, so they won't tell anyone.
No, I was thinking based on your own numbers of what paid out of.
And
We have maybe Heritage as well.
yeah, we have a great relationship with Heritage, but it's even hard to figure out how much because some of it's trucked in and they might pay a lower rate in a different state. And there's so many nuances associated to this that we can't just take how many gallons they pump and then do some math. We could probably get close with some creativity and some assumptions, but
Yeah.
I like to do a lot of assumptions.
To my previous point, I would fly out of VTV more if there were more longer flights. It's the connector that I usually look at. I'll just go from Montreal to Boston and save a couple of bucks. So yeah, I don't think this moves us in the right direction.
We might be in the running for something more westward right now too.
One of the questions is, as far as competition is concerned, what's happening to Montreal and their costs associated with fuel? I know where ours are coming from, but I'm not sure what's going on with them. Do you have any sense of that?
I don't have any sense, but generally speaking, it is more expensive to operate for the airlines out of that airport. And our region, because of infrastructure in New England, we have the highest per gallon cost in jet fuel in the nation.
Okay,
And what's the dollar, is it 6 million, did you say? That the cost of the provisions here?
600,000 is what we
600,000.
we collected, yes.
It's important to note that in any airline,
yes,
fuel is about 60% of total cost. So
Yeah.
it's not incidental.
and did I hear you say that we are doing all right with air traffic controllers?
Yes, yeah. We have not seen any challenges from the shortages, even during the TSA situations with their pay. We did not really see any operational challenges. And it was great to see the community rally behind our TSA agents. We collected over $5,000 in gift cards and over 500 pounds in food that went directly to their families. It was really awesome.
Okay, so Vermont does come through.
Is there a fiscal note on? I can't find it on the website. There's not one listed under fiscal. Under
I
the,
don't know that we've got one.
is it under your name, Chris, or is it under Logan? I can't find it.
What do you look like?
It is
Just put it on this bill, you know,
under Tuesday's date.
or Tuesday, okay.
Tuesdays, okay. Yes, Logan did come in. Did give us a fiscal number, and I didn't see it.
There it
Is there anything at the airport you do want us to tax?
They got second homes there?
Military aircraft, that might be fairly popular in some sections of Burlington. But I don't think we have the authority to.
Do we need a motion or do we need something?
I
here?
think
What
what
do we-
we're
what do
going
we
to
need?
need is a drafter, and we don't have to do this bill today, so we've got
Potential.
more people coming in. If we're agreed that we will delete this tax, then we can get that drafted. We need to delete the section that financed it through money coming in and out of the general fund and the ed fund, because we chose to go with the house solution, which is in the end, $10 million going forward for transportation. So, and we still need to do some more work
We got the
on
check.
some of the MBA, but I think we are finished with Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Madam Chair,
Yes,
just for clarity, I can communicate to Ledge Council so they can get a head start. That my understanding is what you just mentioned is that the committee would want to remove sections 11 and 12, which dealt with that purchase and use tax, as well as sections 44 and 45, which deal with the jet fuel.
I think
At
that
this point,
at this point where we are, we're gonna be taking more testimony on MBA tomorrow, yep. And, this bill, I don't know when we're supposed to have it out, but it's not as important as the budget, which, has to come out today, I am told. So we can have it on the floor on Tuesday.
What issue is, just as far as this is concerned, this is gonna reduce revenue, not by a huge amount, but are we gonna do anything to make that revenue up overall?
I just want to be clear. Senator, you're asking about the jet fuel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that proposal was not factored into the FY27 budget.
Okay, good. Well, that's
Yeah,
good.
that was a last minute
Yeah.
amendment as it was being voted out, is what I
That
was
makes
told,
sense.
so. It hasn't,
But if you want to raise the taxes, Rock.
it's,
That's what I'm hearing.
you get a chance in a couple weeks.
Rich, I'm only on.
Boys,
County.
Yes.
okay.
Grab some.
I love that.
We are 20 minutes ahead.
Do you want to do this appointment right now?
I have
Picture an appointment.
I was just gonna say we could do appointments, or we could consider voting out the appropriations bill.
Yeah, because I would go to training later.
And then we could get out of here earlier today. To go to the train, a cabaret, yes,
All the fun things. Okay.
pizza and ice cream.
Can I do my appointments first?
Yes,
Okay. I have an appointment to it's called the Vermont State Infrastructure Bank Board. Which is operated by VITA in conjunction with the Vermont Agency of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration to assist in the construction or reconstruction of highways, roads, and bridges, as well as certain facilities related to rail transit. I did not know this thing existed, but that's what it's for, transportation infrastructure. And also in certain cases, electric vehicle charging stations, natural gas refueling stations available for public use and that are eligible for funding. So this is this board that deals with this particular specific transportation infrastructure. And there was an appointment, Danny Delaney, from Brattleboro. And I spoke with her. She was a new appointee. I think she has been to one meeting. They meet quarterly. She is currently the Assistant Director and Head of Business Acceleration at the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. And she was great. We had a really nice conversation about her experience. She's also worked for other economic development programs. She grew up in Vermont, left the state for a while, and then moved back a few years ago. And she seems very excited to serve in this role, and I have her resume if anybody's interested in more details. And I told her that she should speak with her Senator Harrison, because Wendy's very excited about transportation infrastructure, and that's what this board does. And she lives in Senator Harrison's district. So I would recommend that we recommend her approval to the full Senate as a new appointee to this obscure board.
That's why I can read out the right thing. Thank you. Senator Hardy has moved that we approve the appointment of Danny Delaney. Different way to spell Delaney. Of Brattleboro to as a public member of the State Infrastructure Bank Board for term including January 18th, 2025 to and including February 28th, 2026, and until a successor is appointed. That is, so we are appointing her a month ago.
Oh, yeah.
Usually how it would go.
Yeah, but so there should be another one coming to appoint her again. Unless the governor's going.
I thought that's only if the term runs out. Then
I
thought it's if the term runs out in
It's,
the initial appointment, then there has to be another appointment. Thought.
And it's
So that's why we did
let's
choose.
appoint her and then we'll query the governor's office. So we'll make her legal for the past year.
Because I had mine had the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten things from previous governors that just held over the summer.
Yeah, and she's not, I mean, she's only been to one, there's only been one meeting.
Well, this was
since
for
she-
1 year.
Yeah.
When they appointed her, so. Let's vote her out.
Okay,
We'll get her on the calendar. And then we can query the governor's office about that.
okay.
All right. Is there any further discussion? If not, let's call the roll.
Let's do it. Senator Chittenden.
Yeah.
Senator Beck.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
Yes.
Senator Gulick.
Yes.
Senator Meadows. Yes. Senator Cummings.
Yes,
That's a 7-0.
okay. Senator Hardy, you could take that up.
Yep.
See,
Do I need the like original things? Okay, cool.
yeah. Okay, we do not have anyone scheduled until 2:30. But have we got another one? Yeah, this. Oh, yes. Well, that's what I wanted to do. We could look at the budget. And I don't have a director here. Oh, yes. Well, I've got joint fiscal. I'm trying to figure out, we weren't gonna do anything to the budget. We weren't even clear why we had it, right? It's kind of a pro forma stop. Just in case they were meddling in our area. So what is the pleasure of the committee? Would we like to hear from people? Would we like to move this forward? I've been told it needs to be out today.
They moved the miscellaneous tax bill.
Yes.
They've
Yes,
released their.
they have moved the miscellaneous tax bill. I was very clear.
Just haircut,
Ready.
fuel surcharge.
Is that a motion?
I would move favorably the bill as received from appropriations H 951.
Okay.
That was it.
Senator Chittenden has moved that we approve H 951 as it was sent to us from Senate Appropriations. Further discussion, Senator Hart.
Thank you. When we got our presentation from Joint Fiscal, there was an item in it that I do not support. It's told it was not our area of jurisdiction, but it is something that I find really unacceptable, which is the funding for the University of Vermont basketball stadium that is taken from the student higher ed trust fund, which is supposed to be for student scholarships. And I can't support that. So I vote no on budget.
Okay, and anyone disagree with Foreman?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's hard to do it two bills. I think it should be funded through the capital budget. That is where we fund buildings. And had they gone through the appropriate channels and had a request in the capital budget and funded out of the capital budget, I think that would have been appropriate. To use a funding source that is not meant for this purpose, I think is really bad fiscal policy. And in a year when we can't even fund some of the really basic things that we're being asked to fund, I think it's also bad public policy. So I can't support it. And I'll see about it for amendment, but thank you, Madam Chair.
The issue, I just have a question in terms of where you say it should be funded from. What, is there something in statute or rules or whatever that dictates what goes into or out of the particular fund that you're thinking of as opposed to this?
The Higher Education Trust Fund is used for student scholarships for students at all of the Vermont higher education institutions. So UVM, the state colleges, and CCV, the community colleges, I believe. I think it's just the public institutions. Could be some private, I'm not sure. But point being is that it's for student scholarships. And what this part of the budget does is takes money from that fund to use to put toward a basketball stadium.
I mean, I understand. I'm just trying to understand, are there some rules, for example, that say what can be taken out of
I believe there are.
I'd like to just read them.
That's a good question. We don't have ledge counsel in here, but I believe that there are statutory requirements.
If there's a statutory requirement, I would agree with you, but I just haven't read anything, I haven't seen anything that tells me one way or the other.
That's a great point. I just know that that's what that fund has traditionally been used for, and I think it's required that that's what the fund is used for. And then there is this scheme for paying it back over a few years, but that is using money that usually goes to the general fund to pay it back. And as everybody knows, our general fund is in short supply and we can't even fund some of the basic requests that we've been getting this year. And so, you know, this is a request for money to go toward a building, and that's what our capital budget is used for. And in fact, UVM has a line in our capital budget that is often, you know, I think annually we give them an amount of money to fund buildings at UVM. And so if this were funded through the capital budget and they had come in with that request, I would have found that much more appropriate and could support it if it were a capital expenditure.
Is the draft on the budget?
Joint Fiscal Office.
Joint Fiscal Office.
Yes.
It's just.
I think the attorney that would do the Higher Education Trust Fund is
John.
Beth or John.
Yeah.
They've done walkthroughs on the higher ed trust fund and other committees, and if the committee's interested,
If you have your computers, the statute 16 VSA 2018.
And I agree.
Looking at it right now.
To Senator Brock's point, what my understanding is by years serving with Senator Kitchell is that it is common for us to notwithstand language. We are doing it this year. I understand with the IT fund, much in some chagrin, just to move money around based on you see ebbs and flows. And this too, I think was inspired because it's from the estate taxes, which is very volatile. So rather than count on estate taxes from year to year, because you just never know who that's going to have that much money. This past year, there was a very large estate that created a bubble in this fund. And so it was thought to be used to support the higher education institution for what I would see as much needed infrastructure to help the flagship institution and university. But I want to acknowledge, I am very biased that work for UVM. I bleed green and gold, and I just think this is something that should happen. And I really like what appropriations has done to build this.
I'm just interested in whether or not what's been done, is in accordance with the rules associated with each pot of money. That's all I want to know.
I'm just saying,
And
it's been-
if it is discretionary to make that discretionary move, I may well defer to
We can see if we can get
appropriations.
John
doing
in
it, but
here,
I
but
don't have enough information otherwise.
the word notwithstanding
Yeah.
allows us, so we can say notwithstanding the rule. I'm assuming they did that.
They did.
Okay,
They did.
so the budget had a notwithstanding.
Mhm.
We do it. There was money there. There was a need somewhere else. We can agree if that's good or not.
Yeah, the judgment call of whether a basketball stadium as opposed to an academic building. They have the judgment to exercise
I
that.
don't think it's about the building, it's about, I mean, this fund is supposed to be for academic scholarships for students. And with all due respect on the quote unquote need for a basketball stadium. There's a huge need for student scholarships. I have 2 kids in college right now. I mean, the cost of college education at public universities, we have the highest public university tuition in the country. And to take money away from scholarships and put it toward a stadium when there are better funding sources for that, frankly, I find it offensive that we would do that. And that's why, even though it's a relatively small part of a very large budget, I just cannot support the larger budget with this. We said no to the food bank. We said no to so many nonprofit organizations that provide critical human services. You guys heard all morning in your morning committee about what the needs were. This is not an appropriate use of this funding. We should be helping kids go to college. And if there's a quote unquote windfall in the fund, send more kids to college, provide bigger scholarships so people have less student debt. Don't use it to fund a basketball stadium. That is an expense that belongs in the capital budget.
I remember there was testimony that said enrollment was down. Enrollment in colleges is declining. Baby boom, we're not producing the kids we built out. We've lost several small colleges and several more are struggling. And the argument was that this is an investment that would make students more inclined to come here. And testimony in the past has been that most Vermont students get a scholarship of some form.
Well, they do, the vast majority don't pay tuition fees. And
Out of state students.
we give those students more money that they still pay the same amount of money.
So anyway,
I will support everything that my colleague Senator Hardy said. I will add that I'm concerned about the precedent that we're setting grading that particular fund. I think there could be a slippery slope there, and that concerns me a lot. That said, I am going to vote for the budget though, but I do support everything that was said.
Senator Brock, having been told that they did use the notwithstanding word budget, are you feeling comfortable with this?
I'm comfortable enough to vote. for, I do have reservations. And I have some of the same reservations that Senator Hardy's expressed in terms of where we're putting money, but I understand also that this may have a result that people have spoken about, talked about, and reasoned, such as bringing in more students who would otherwise not have come, and perhaps without a revenue impact or a cost impact to them individually that may not affect their ability to come. So I'm inclined to vote for it, but I am not entirely comfortable.
Okay. Senator Chitney, you made a motion.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to approve 951 as it was presented to us. Is there any further discussion, amendments, concerns? If not, the clerk call the roll.
Senator Chitman,
Yes.
Senator Beck,
Yes.
Senator Hardy,
No.
Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Hewlett,
Yes.
Senator Meadows, yes, Senator Cummings,
Yes.
6-1-0.
Okay. And who would like to report that? Okay, that is 610. Senator Chittenden will be the reporter. And we are back on schedule, but we have done appointments and we have done one other thing. So we may get you out of here in time to do other things. We're completely changing course now. We don't allow this committee. We're going to 8385, an act relating to remedies and protections for the victims of coerced debt. And Edie Brennan was going to have we heard from her. She's going to pass. She confirmed that she be here. Okay, well, we can stand at ease. Or maybe Maria, you could start walking us through, and then when she gets here, we'll let her tell us what problem this bill was aimed at solving. This has been, it was originally referred to judiciary, which has looked at a couple of sections they felt were within their jurisdiction, but then they released it to us because a lot of it has to do with banking regulations.
Yeah.
Not law or legal.
Yeah, we gotta
Crime.
walk through in judiciary, and upon the walkthrough, had a very, very short discussion and decided this Sunday
That's,
based on the bulk of the findings part of it.
that was like 9:40, which is on the calendar, and I'm reporting, and I said, what is it? And then it's the bill where we voted it out and sent it to natural resources because it was all energy planning, and all we did was say, yes, Burlington Electric can continue what it's been doing, and we killed a committee that hasn't met in 5 years. So we put a very small fingerprint on that bill. Yeah, I guess it hasn't, it's not sitting on the notice count, but it is in natural resources. And we've had a couple like that this year, where the overlaps have been interesting. So let's take a look at this one.
Okay, Maria Royal, legislative council. So before I pull up the bill, H385, I know Representative Rainey would have done this.
History, her name.
Edie Rainey. Just kind of big picture. There are actually two substantive provisions of the bill. There's the first part that deals with coerced debt, legal remedies and protections. And then there's a separate section that deals with bank holds in the event there's suspected financial exploitation going on. So two substantive provisions. And,
Okay.
oh, good. Okay,
Here, here.
so I
We're
will
a few minutes
defer
ahead, but
representative.
this is the name of the bill, so.
I haven't really done anything yet. Oh, no, it's
So-
timing. Yeah, excellent.
Just
Do you want to stay up?
Yeah, it's okay. Okay.
you reported.
Yes, hello. I Senate Finance, Edie Granning, representative of Jericho and Underhill. I was the reporter of, and the, one of the co-sponsors of the bill, 385, and it does two things. It provides an avenue for folks who have been hit with coerced debt to get some relief in certain circumstances. And it also provides for transaction holds at banks. So if a bank, if a teller at a bank has somebody coming in to get a lot of more money than they normally take out, it gives the banks an opportunity to just say, let's hold on that and give 15-day kind of waiting period to say, like, let's make sure that's money that you don't want, that you know, you're not going to lose because somebody's saying, put it in a crypto machine and send it to, you know, wherever it's going to go. So the bill is based on two studies that were done in the off session last year. It's out of a working group, so they came through, we talked about them before, which is why they sound familiar to you. The FR ran both of them and continue to work with banks and with lenders and advocates on both of those issues, and brought you a pretty buttoned up compromise bill on how to navigate this in Vermont going forward. Coerced debt is there 7 states that do it now that have avenues for people to get some relief. Ours is we're very Vermont based with forms and a pretty clear limited scope on how to do that. Not all the states are different, but they've been doing it, I think, since 2019. It's been effective in different states. So, you know, we're not late to the party, but we're not the first ones doing it. What else?
That's it. We're just looking for you to tell us what problem we're trying to solve.
Oh, great. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is just help people who are really in a horrible space have a way to rebuild their lives. We made sure that there's a provision in there for banks to go after the perpetrators so that they can collect the money. And we're hoping that we can help a few people every year to get that opportunity to restart. And then the transaction holds would stop people from being in these positions where they just gave away a lot of money because they were put in that right now, get it done, give us your money, and just give them that time to, so we're just trying to make people's financial lives a little bit better.
Okay, any questions? Yes,
I'm just curious about the voting committee and on the floor and.
It was unanimous, in committee and with a voice vote on the floor, and it sounded pretty darn unanimous. Yeah.
okay. No serious opposition.
Yes. Okay, to get there, it was a lot of work. We had a lot of meetings with advocates, and on both sides to really find that middle line. I think we did that. Thank you. Great. Thanks. And Maria was outstanding,
Okay.
as usual.
So Maria, how we can walk through.
Representative Brand wants to have me confused with him. So, the reason why I want to start with, kind of a preliminary document that I quickly put together is because the first 6 pages of the bill are all definitions. And it's really hard to understand what these terms mean and what the context is, just diving into a bunch of definitions without understanding more detail about the focus. So what I'm gonna hand out, and that's also posted online, so I'll just share my screen. So you can kind of refer to this as needed. Going forward.
That's easy to read.
So, So just again, like big picture, debtors for purposes of the core debt and who can avail themselves of some of the legal protections and remedies. These are survivors of domestic abuse, trafficking, human trafficking, or they're vulnerable adults who are survivors of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So if you're, I'm going to use the word survivor, but it's of those categories. And in the context of that abuse or trafficking or exploitation, the perpetrator has used your personal information either without your knowledge or through the use of threat or intimidation to secure a loan in your name. Then you would be considered a victim of coerced debt.
Kind of bring in identity theft.
Yes, it could be, absolutely, because identity theft is when someone uses your personal information without your knowledge. But this would be in the context of a domestic situation, but you could still file identity theft for purposes of like credit reports and so on. There are avenues that exist. But what I wanted to share with you, just to be clear on some of the terms specifically regarding the documentation that's necessary, that kind of triggers all of these protections. So first off, the debtor, who's incurred the coerced debt, would go to a creditor and submit a statement of coerced debt, which is supported by adequate documentation. Both of those terms are defined. We'll go through what the statement is, and then the documentation could be one of any three listed documents. So first, with respect to the statement, the debtor's statement of coerced debt, it has to be in writing. It must be sworn to and either notarized, or there must be a self-attestation saying subject to perjury, everything you're putting in the document is accurate and true to the best of your knowledge. It identifies the debt. The statement should describe the circumstances to the best of the debtor's knowledge under which it was incurred. The statement, which also included disclosure that, specific disclosure that you did not willfully enter into the debt, and then provide the identity of the perpetrator and contact information. And there's an exception unless you fear some future abuse disclosing that information. So you can withhold that if you're concerned. So that's the statement that you would need to file with a creditor, and it could be any creditor. It could be very generally defined. So you could talking about a credit card, car loan, bank loan, whatever. There are some other, okay, well, I'm just gonna say it now instead of waiting. So in terms of the type of debt that is covered, it includes both secured and unsecured loan, but it specifically does not include commercial loans or mortgage loans. So in terms of the documentation that you would need to present to a creditor, it could be a police report where you've described the debt and you've also described the circumstances specifically, and that would be subject to penalties. It is a crime to submit false information to a law enforcement agency. If you have been able to secure a court order already where there's finding of coerced debt, certainly would be sufficient documentation. Or you can submit a sworn certification from a qualified third-party professional. So you can kind of see why I'm trying to call out these terms a little bit, because sometimes sworn certification, statement of course, I get a little bit confused. So I'm hoping that this just helps to clarify. So you'll see what I've listed here are individuals that could qualify as third-party professionals. So it could be an officer of the court, the judge, or other court personnel, law enforcement, personnel, a court-appointed special advocate, which could have the guardian ad litem, representing best interests of children in a custody, divorce proceeding, or abuse proceeding. A crisis worker, it's actually defined, in Vermont law. These are individuals, it can be a volunteer, but for purposes of this section, they have to be employed at a program that provides services to victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. Or a licensed attorney or a healthcare provider. And then in terms of the information that that professional would provide, again, it has to be in writing, also sworn to, subject to perjury. You have to specify the professional that they had in person or face-to-face virtual contact with the debtor in the context of the professional relationship and professional interactions. And from that, the professional has a reasonable basis to believe that the debtor was a victim or survivor of abuse, and also that the debt was coerced. Just wanted to be clear on those terms because they get a little bit confusing. So that's all that is, that document, and I will now pull up the bill itself. Not at all. Okay. So we've actually, I said there are 6 pages of definition, but because some of these are pretty long, there aren't that many. We've pretty much covered the major definitions. So again, this is the adequate documentation. I think I pretty much described it. Police report, the court order, or the sworn certification. Just specifically, it might be helpful to look at the definition of coerced debt. Means all or a portion of secured or unsecured debt solely or jointly in a debtor's name that was incurred as a result of domestic abuse, human trafficking, or the abuse, neglect, or exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and the perpetrator's either use of the debtor's personal information without the debtor's knowledge, authorization, or consent, or use of threat of force, intimidation, undue influence, fraud, deception, coercion, or other similar means against the debtor. And again, as I mentioned, it does not include mortgage loans, any loans secured by real estate, and it does not include commercial loans for business.
So just a question.
Yes. Yeah.
Why are those 2 exceptions made?
It was just part of the discussions and negotiations between the interested stakeholders. I think it's fair to say that maybe the banks and credit unions were a little bit concerned about mortgage loans. Similarly, commercial loans.
And we're here for that, the credit unions.
Yeah.
Anyone that wants to talk. Did you?
I did, yeah, and Senator Frost went, that's fine. Vulnerable adult is a term we use often in the Health and Welfare Committee. Is there a definition in statute?
There is definitely a definition in statute. And it's referred to in here, or it's cited in here. And actually, I was just looking that up myself. So I can read it to you pretty quickly. That'd be helpful. So a vulnerable adult means any person 18 years of age or older who is, and then there are 3 different categories. The first is a resident of a facility required to be licensed under Chapter 71. I think that might be an assisted living or long-term care facility, if I'm not mistaken. Or is a resident of a psychiatric hospital or a psychiatric unit of a hospital. Or separate category, was receiving assistance with personal care services for more than 1 month from a designated home health agency or from a person or organization that offers, provides, or arranges for personal care, or is determined to be clinically eligible to receive long-term Medicaid waiver services. And then finally, regardless of residence or whether any type of service is received, has a physical, mental, or developmental disability, infirmities as a result of brain damage or mental condition, or infirmities of aging resulting in impairment of the individual's ability to independently engage in activities of daily living or instrumental activities of daily living, or to provide for some aspect of the adult's own personal care without assistance, or some impairment of the adult's ability to protect the adult from abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Okay.
That's the question, Maria.
Yeah, sure.
So if we exclude out mortgage loans and commercial loans, it makes sense to me because there's usually assistant lawyers involved. I'm assuming that, or what does this now cover? Is it mostly just credit cards and credit lines? Are there other types of debt that this is likely gonna involve?
It's credit cards is a big one.
Yeah.
Personal car loans
Oh, car loans. Okay.
potentially.
Okay.
Where personal fear of safety required a new pickup truck every year.
So then, domestic abuse is defined under Title 15. It covers everything from stalking and sexual assault to coercive and controlling behavior. And the other thing I'll just mention is it applies to family members or members of the same household. So if you lived with somebody or are living with or have lived with somebody, you would be considered part of the household, or if you were in a dating relationship, or if you had a sexual relationship. So it's a pretty broad term. And that was significant because there was concern, wanting to make sure that foster children, for example, would be protected, if their personal information was used.
If someone was being stalked and the stalker says, I'll go away if.
Yep, that is,
That-
stalking
yeah.
is covered under domestic abuse.
Okay. Even if it's not, I've never been in a relationship with this person. This is just a very sick person who's
So it's not a family or household member
just,
and not in the context of,
just.
then I just yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think that. I don't think you're just the victim of, yeah, a stranger stalking you.
Yeah.
So future abuse, again, that comes up in the context of not wanting to disclose perpetrator's identity or information because you're concerned about that future abuse. Good faith comes up in the context of the investigation.
Future abuse means abuses, except that the abuse need not occur between family or household.
Right, that's because it could be a vulnerable adult who's being abused by someone who's not. a
Okay,
member
wouldn't
of-
cover the stalker
Right.
who was doing this for the purpose of.
Right. Unless you're a vulnerable adult.
Okay.
And then human trafficking, just citing to the relevant definition. So the perpetrator obviously is somebody, who causes or is alleged to have caused coerced debt to be incurred by another. We already talked about the qualified third party professional. Again, this only comes up if they're submitting certification, on behalf of a debtor. Statement is the debtor's statement that they need to provide to the creditor. So again, they have to identify, must be sworn. They identify the debt, description of the circumstances, statement that they did not willingly authorize the use of their name or personal information to incur such debt. Any other information regarding the debt, including account information, credit card information if applicable, name of any other individuals whose name might have been, the debt might have been jointly incurred in. And again, the perpetrator's information, and then there's provisions about just ensuring that they also include their preferred language, preferred contact. For example, if they don't want information mailed to their home, or they don't need a home address or home telephone number, they can go through a there are kind of safe addresses for the protection of. In any event, okay, so, and then what's, I'm just looking at it on page 5, is just the statement has to be notarized or include the self-attestation, which is subject to perjury. Sworn certification, I pretty much described it. Again, it's third-party professional statement. I have reasonable basis to believe in my professional capacity that this person is a survivor of abuse and has incurred coerced debt. So then we get into kind of the substance. We're now through the definitions. But what I did want to mention, all of these provisions are a new subchapter in Title IX under the Consumer Protection Act. And so what that means is any violations of these provisions would be subject to kind of the remedies and protections of the Consumer Protection Act, in addition to what's already in here. So, for example, the Attorney General has the authority to conduct investigations if there's been a violation of the Consumer Protection Act. There's a private action brought, and if debtor brings a private action against a perpetrator, they're entitled to recover attorney's fees as well as punitive damages. So there are, in a broader consumer protection context, there are some protections in place in addition to what you see here. So line 13. Person shall not cause another person to incur coerced debt. Substantiated coerced debt is not enforceable against the debtor. So now we get into the creditor's conduct. So this is if a debtor goes to the creditor, presents a statement and presents the documentation. There's a whole timeline here of what the creditor would have to do. So initially, within 10 business days of receiving that information, creditor has to cease all collection activities, not sell the debt or transfer the debt to another entity, notify the debtor that completes collection activities pending further review of the claim. And then if they already furnished adverse information about the debt to a credit reporting agency, contact the credit reporting agency and say that the debt is being disputed, the accuracy of the debt is being disputed. So subsection B is just if the creditor receives this notification, maybe it receives it orally or maybe it doesn't have all of the information that's required, then within 10 business days, the creditor would have to inform the debtor that there's missing information, and to assist with that, they could provide the debtor with what's referred to as model form A1. And there's a whole provision in here that says what's included in this model form, but basically it's going to be a document that DFR prepares in substantially the form in this bill. And it would be a document that's posted on the webpage available. So ideally, if a debtor is working with an advocate, they would find that, maybe use that form initially to kind of know exactly what the requirements are. And it's a little less legalese. It's meant to be a little bit more understandable about what the requirements are. So in any event, the creditor would then mail that form if they don't have the information that's necessary or provided to the debtor to make sure that that isn't the problem for not conducting or failing to go through the investigation. So then the creditor would have 30 days to conduct a reasonable investigation of the disputed information. And that includes review of all information provided by the debtor and any other relevant information available to the creditor. And then upon completion of the investigation, make a determination as to the accuracy of the claim of coerced debt. Subdivision 2 is just allows for an extension of the 30-day period by up to 15 days. If necessary, there's supplementary information filed, etc. So then once that determination is made from that 30-day period, the creditor then has 5 days to notify the debtor of its determination. It has to be in writing. And as part of that determination must provide a good faith basis for the determination. And then just an assurance that that notice shall not include personally identifiable information of another person, particularly a bank, for example, a bank employee, that is not disclosed. So if the creditor determines that the disputed debt is coerced debt, the creditor shall notify the debtor that it is ceasing collection activities and contact any consumer reporting agency to which it furnished adverse information about the debtor's coerced debt and request that such information be deleted from the debtor's file and credit report. Or if the creditor determines the available information does not establish the disputed debt's coerced debt, the creditor may recommence collection activities, but may not sell or transfer the debt. So they would have to maintain the debt. And then subsection E, this has to do with communications from the creditor to the debtor, just specifies that they shall be made using the debtor's preferred contact method. Creditors shall make reasonable efforts to use the debtor's preferred language as identified in the statement of coerced debt. And then in connection with the statement of coerced debt, the creditor shall not disclose contact information that the debtor provides. Any of the information in the statement without the debtor's express written authorization, unless directed or authorized to do so by court order. The creditor may request the identity of the perpetrator and the contact information, but again, there's another opportunity for the debtor to sign a sworn statement specifying that disclosing such information is likely to result in abuse to the debtor or to a member of the debtor's immediate family. So model form A1, I don't have to go through in detail unless you want me to, but this is again the form that DFR will prepare, post on its website, which can be used for purposes of completing the statement. And again, it's not quite legalese. You want to read through it? What I never know exactly enough. Okay.
I don't get into the form. I don't think you can read through.
Oh, okay. So it should track everything, all of the requirements that we've already reviewed. So then, that brings us all the way to subsection H, and this is on page 13, line 11. And this basically says, so if the coerced debt is secured by tangible personal property, car, for example, nothing in this subchapter shall affect a creditor's right to enforce a security interest upon default, and then the citation to the appropriate provision of the UCC, the Universal Commercial Code, as it applies to secure transactions, including repossession, surrender, or court-ordered seizure of the subject collateral. So the creditor can go after the collateral, irrespective of anything that's so far happened. However, a creditor is prohibited from collecting or seeking to collect any deficiency from the victim or any outstanding payment city or
The creditor collected from the person did the coercion.
yes. And we're actually about to get to the civil legal remedies, which include a right of action against the perpetrator. There's a finding of coerced debt. So, good timing. So, civil legal remedies. So a debtor shall not be liable to a creditor for coerced debt. So, if the creditor decides to enforce the debt, they've been presented with the information, they don't find that it supports finding, in their opinion, of coerced debt, they initiate an action to collect the debt from the debtor. The debtor may establish prima facie case that the debt is coerced by submitting the statement of coerced debt and adequate documentation. So what that basically means is that is sufficient information to prevent the court from dismissing a case. If you provided that information, your claim is not going to be dismissed, and significantly, the next sentence, if the debtor establishes a prima facie case of coerced debt, then the burden shifts to the creditor. The creditor shall bear the burden of proving by a preponderance of the evidence that the debt is not coerced debt. So at the conclusion of the proceeding, the civil proceeding, if the court finds a debt is coerced debt, first of all, the court shall vacate any previous default judgment issued against the debtor on the coerced debt. So for example, if there was a dissolution of marriage and the property was divided and the debtor was responsible in that proceeding, but did not participate in the proceeding, that provision would be vacated with respect to that debt only. Then the creditor shall have a cause of action against the perpetrator. And in addition, the debtor shall have a cause of action against the perpetrator for any payments or costs that they incurred already in connection with the coerced debt. So this section shall not be construed to limit or infringe upon any other rights or remedies available under common law or any other provision of law or rule. Subsection D relates to the debtor not wanting to disclose the perpetrator's information. The creditor may file a motion with the judge in a court requesting a hearing to determine the danger of future abuse. So the debtor doesn't want to disclose it. The creditor can then try to compel the disclosure by filing a motion asking the judge to require disclosure. In which case, the debtor shall bear the burden of proving by a preponderance of the evidence that if the information is disclosed, the perpetrator poses a danger of future abuse to the debtor, a member of the debtor's immediate family. If the court finds the debtor meets this burden, information is not disclosed. If the debtor doesn't meet the burden, the information is disclosed. So there's a court process for that. And then there are other protections, procedural protections in the proceeding, subsection E. Upon motion of a debtor, the court may seal court records, redact personally identifiable information, direct that depositions or evidentiary hearings be conducted remotely. The debtor wants a relief from abuse order. This is just specifying lines 10 and 11. They follow the existing statutory procedures for seeking such an order.
Larry, can I ask you a quick?
Sure.
If the name of the perpetrator is revealed to the creditor, then is it like subject to public availability, or can it be kept confidential by the creditor? Or
I don't think so. I'm trying to think of a provision in here that specifically addresses that information. So if the creditor has the identity of the perpetrator, there might be general banking provisions, financial information. You wouldn't just disclose it, but if you could bring legal action, and at that point, it would be public, right? So, so I think of. So subsection F just provide that the provisions of this subchapter apply in any action brought in court of this state, notwithstanding contractual choice of law provisions. So if you enter into a contract in another state, and typically the other state's laws might apply to the terms of the contract, that would be true, except that for purposes of the availability of these remedies, Vermont law would apply to the contract. Nothing in this subchapter shall be.
Just ask you
Yeah.
a question on that. If two people who are not residents in the state but are here for some reason, a vacation or a long stay, you don't have to be a Vermont resident to file or to be subject to it if you are within the jurisdiction of the state court. Is that,
Right,
I'm just trying to think through the
Yeah, I know.
implications of that.
I think that's right. So, but you're in Vermont now.
Yes.
Okay, but you entered into a contract.
You may have
Another
entered into
jurisdiction.
a contract someplace else, or you may have entered into a contract
Okay.
here. And I'm really actually thinking about it from both directions. Can a non-resident sue under this because of either abuse that happened here in Vermont, or because of a contract that was executed in Vermont, or because of whatever the subject?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I can't say I'm very sharp on personal jurisdiction issues.
Yeah.
But if a creditor was trying to enforce in a court of this state, obviously. But if you're a debtor and you want to initiate an action against the perpetrator in this state, you're here. The debt's here, I don't know, let me think, I have to think about that a little bit more.
You always have a chart.
Yeah, I know, I need another chart, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, okay. And then I should mention Michelle Childs, it's our judiciary, and all of these legal remedies that I went through, this section was reviewed by House Judiciary. They didn't have possession of the bill, but they've reviewed, I went through this, but she might be able to
Okay.
more quickly address the additional issues. So then, nothing in the subchapter shall be construed to preclude a creditor from seeking recourse under applicable law for a claim of course debt that is knowingly and materially false. Subsection H just specifies that the perpetrator is not a necessary party to an action between a creditor and a debtor under the section. But if there is a finding of coerced debt, that finding is not binding on the perpetrator. There would have to be another proceeding against the perpetrator where the perpetrator is given an opportunity to defend themselves. So then the next two subsections have to do with statutes of limitation. The first one has to do with a debtor who might want to bring an action against the perpetrator. It must be commenced within 6 years after the date the debtor discovered or reasonably should have discovered the coerced debt, which is pretty typical. But it goes on to say, or within 6 years after the coercion or abuse giving rise to the debt ceased, whichever is later. So if you know about it, but you're not comfortable bringing in action, perhaps because of ongoing abuse, the statute of limitations would not hold until you feel that you have an opportunity that abuse has ceased. Similarly, if a creditor wants to pursue an action against the perpetrator, they also need to pursue that action within 6 years after they've received notice of the coerced debt, the debtor's statement, documentation, or receive notice of the identity of the perpetrator, because if it's not disclosed and the court doesn't compel disclosure, they might not know. They're not going to be time barred from bringing in action until they know. So the next section having to do with violations. This is just kind of the trigger, the hook of the Consumer Protection Act. So Consumer Protection Act generally applies to unfair and deceptive acts in trade and commerce. This just specifies that a violation of any of the provisions of this subchapter constitutes an unfair or deceptive act and would be subject to all of them. Protections and investigative authority of the Attorney General, et cetera, of the Consumer Protection Act, which is basically somewhat restated in subsection B, so that Attorney General has the same authority to make rules, conduct civil investigations, enter into assurances of discontinuance, and bring civil actions as provided under Consumer There are confidentiality provisions, so any information, financial, personal, identifying information related to course debt that the debtor shares pursuant to this subchapter, shall not be disclosed by the recipient of that information without consent. And or unless disclosure is authorized by court order. Similarly, if information is subject to privilege under federal or state law, it shall not be disclosed by the recipient unless, again, the debtor expressly waives the provision or the privilege is waived by an express provision of law. And then subsection C has to do with information that might be acquired by a public body. It would not be subject to Public Records Act, public inspection and copying. It would remain confidential. So section 2 is basically
May I
yeah,
ask
sure,
Another question.
sure.
Regarding disclosure, if in the event that this results in a court action, that court case of transfer would not be confidential, would it?
Right, so parts of it might be redacted. There are, I know, I'm not familiar with family court abuse proceedings, but I know there are protections, so there may be. But if to the extent that's not entirely true, then that might be considered a waiver of the confidentiality. If the creditor is initiating the action against the debtor and the debtor doesn't want that information public, out of concern, fear. And I think it could be kept confidential. But without making a motion.
Would it be something, for example, I'm just trying to envision litigation that could result from this. Could the creditor bring a legal action against the perpetrator? Or the perpetrator and the debtor? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what this ought to look like in terms of how the creditor gets made whole potentially in this.
Yeah, so not in here, but I think maybe what you're getting to. So there's the provision that says the perpetrator is not a necessary party. But if you know who the perpetrator is, you might want to implead the perpetrator so that they are party to the action.
Well, I would guess,
Right.
if you're trying to get your money back, how would you get it back otherwise? If you're the creditor?
Well, you would bring an action against the perpetrator. You would bring an action against the debtor.
Yeah.
If the debtor says this is coerced debt and you know who the perpetrator is, then you would try to implead the perpetrator so that they're made a party. And then hopefully have it all resolved as one
But
proceeding.
then I just look at the issue of then what confidential is the paragraphs that we just read.
Well, that's right. Then you might not be able to pursue an action against the perpetrator until you know who the perpetrator is.
And about the debtor,
And the
I'm the
court
one who's
has-
out of money, and if you now have you impeded my ability to recover this lost whatever, because you have this argument between two people that the debtor, am caught in the middle of.
If possible. I mean, it would still be a court proceed. The court would have to find that it was coerced debt. And yeah, and the burden is on the creditor to prove that it's not coerced debt. So they're more protective than what you would normally have in a civil enforcement action. Trying to collect the debt.
And you're saying that the creditor now has to prove which of these two parties who may both have signed a document for this debt is responsible and is now limited in terms of who he can discuss this with in order to resolve his case?
Well, within the court, you could discuss it. The judge would have to be aware of all of the relevant facts. Things might be redacted so that they're not publicly available, but within the proceeding itself, my understanding is.
I assume the debtor might well have to do his or her own investigation.
Yep.
Does this impose limitations on the ability to do that by virtue of the confidentiality that's being imposed?
Of the debtor?
Yeah.
Because they couldn't have access to.
Well, the information behind it is to these allegations, everything associated with the protections that are being given to the debtor.
I think that most of the protections are around the debtor's information. So anything that the debtor knows about the circumstances, like who actually incurred the debt, they would presumably, they would know the perpetrator.
Presumably, I'm just wondering, are there, as I read this and the other
Yeah,
provisions regarding confidentiality, I'm just what the implications are, just trying to think through.
yeah, yeah.
Let's,
No, they're good questions. I maybe think through some of them too a little more thoroughly.
Yeah.
Appreciate them.
and I have one. Some people make very bad choices. Some people in relationships. Some people continually make very bad choices. Either with the same person or with other people. If you find, is there a limit on how many times you could run up $100,000 worth of credit card debt and say, oops, this person made me do it. And then 3 years later, another person made me do it. And that other person now is long gone. I don't want to set up another scamming ability.
So I think that those are great questions. I mean, some of these issues were discussed of wanting to provide the protections, but at the same time not allow someone to potentially raise a claim. Ultimately, if there's a pattern,
Yeah.
I think that might be evidence that a court is going to look at, right? If it's shown that the information was submitted falsely, the creditor can pursue an action, right? So there are protections. Ultimately, it's up to a court to decide.
Yeah, I mean, it would tie in with Randy's question is, are we, I can see sheltering the victim of coerced debt, but are we also sheltering the perpetrator? Because in the case of coerced debt, that's who you want to go after. But I mean, you could be open to scams. I mean, I could do this a couple times for something caught on. But there's also people who are essentially naive or innocent or maybe of limited ability. Just in situations that same person probably wouldn't. And it's, is there a way to set it here? You can't keep doing this. You've got to get counseling. You've got, I suppose the court could order that.
The court would ultimately under this, it would be up to the court in each instance. But you're raising really good points. The bill tries, I know from the committee, try to strike that balance between providing protection, but not being unfair to creditors. Whether this is the right balance, that's the policy
This is the
considering. So
first walk through and it's going to take a few minutes, to sit down and understand what each A, B, and C, how it relates.
Yeah.
Because to understand that, I know judiciary looked at I thought they said they looked at sections such and such.
the section that we just went through, the civil legal remedies.
Yeah.
That's primarily what they were
Focused on, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so there's another section.
Well, the prior provisions about what the creditor's obligations are,
Okay,
once,
that's the
the review, doing the internal review. They didn't really look at that, and then the totally separate substantive provision about bank holds.
That's what that's,
They
okay,
didn't
that's
really look at that.
probably where our jurisdiction is.
Well,
That's
you're the,
We've got
And that.
some of this, yeah, okay. So,
Yeah, I guess I would just remind people that there's a definition of coerced debt. And it's part of the definition, it was incurred as a result of domestic abuse, human trafficking, or the abuse, neglect, or exploitation of a vulnerable adult. So it's not just somebody who's, like, a sucker, or or whatever you want to call it, or somebody who's naive. It's somebody who could be the victim of domestic abuse, and their spouse or partner or whoever is saying, like, you take out this loan or I'll beat the crap out of you, kind of thing. So they're coerced into a situation as a result of abuse, or they are, a teenager who is being human trafficked and said, you have to take out this loan in order to pay for your apartment that you have to be in while you're being the victim of a human trafficking, prostitution ring or something. These are not just people who are, making bad decisions. These are people who are literally being coerced through abuse and or a vulnerable adult who is not, maybe not in the situation to be able to tell. So use of threat or force, intimidation, and then that has to be determined by this definition that it's coerced debt before the protections take place. So it's first, like, is it coerced debt? And if it is, then there are these protections for the person who was the victim of it, and whether or not those proceed with all the things. And I think the confidentiality is to protect the person who could be the victim. And sometimes you won't know who the perpetrator is, not because of confidentiality, but because they could have, like, skipped town with the money, or be running a prostitution ring and you're not sure who that is yet, or something like that. So.
okay, let's finish walking through it. This is starting to feel like IMBA.
what?
The transportation.
Oh.
You don't want to, no, but that was on Friday, and it was the same kind of just an overload of information. That is just gonna take some time for our brains.
Honestly, I think it will help when you hear from the creditors, when you hear from the department, when you hear from the advocates, to help kind of flesh out how this is gonna play out. They'll do a better job than I can.
You're doing great.
And that's for sure. Section 2, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on. This is Vermont's Fair Credit Reporting Act. There's some, like, technical changes, but the only substance provision is basically if the debtor wants to go directly to the credit reporting agency, something that's on their credit report, and have it removed. Same basic type of thing. They submit their statement, the documentation, and credit reporting agency reinvestigates and then makes a finding. Will remove it or not. Section 3 is just basically a technical fix. It's also under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and what's on line 5 there is a reference to the Vermont's identity theft law. It includes more than subsection A, so this is a technical change, not a substantive change. So that's it with respect to coercive. Although the other thing I want to mention is, I'm not going to jump ahead. I don't want to do all the scrolling, but this would take effect on July 1st, 2028. So this does not take effect immediately. And then also, just so you know, we talked about what constitutes coerced debt. It would apply only to outstanding coerced debt. So if it was incurred prior to the effective date, just still out there.
Okay, so there's
But
no
if that
backlog.
outstanding, it would apply to that debt. Okay, you can't go back
And yes, and say,
No longer.
yeah, okay.
under this. So now we're getting into the next substantive provision, protections from financial exploitation. So basically, covered entity has a duty imposed by law and contract, and this is just in general, to conduct customer-directed transactions, these are banking transactions, in a timely manner and in accordance with the customer's instructions. Again, these are findings. Finding number 2, customers are increasingly being induced to authorize transactions that are not in their best interests. Therefore, it is the intent of the General Assembly to ensure customers have ready access to their funds and provide a covered entity with the tools and protections to intervene in a customer-directed transaction when the covered reasonably believes the transaction presents potential significant risk of harm to the customer. So those are the findings and the intent. And then more specifically, it is not the intent of the General Assembly to impose a duty on a covered entity to contravene the valid instructions of a customer, and nothing in this chapter creates such a duty. So we'll go through kind of everything, but basically this is saying it's up to the discretion of the
So
covered
they
entity.
can't say
and
that
they
you
have-
let me do it, therefore you're liable.
Exactly. Yeah, right. So again, trying to strike the balance. They're not liable, they have a duty to do something if it's, you know.
But if they are feeling really
They're
concerned, they
concerned that
have
they have a
the
reasonable
power.
basis, they can act according to these provisions.
Okay.
So account, basically, any, depository account, share, custodial trust transaction account held individually or jointly, checking, savings, money market certificate, all of the instruments you would think, would be covered. And then the term includes accounts held for the benefit of another, including fiduciary, guardianship, conservatorship, power of attorney, and representative payee accounts, to the extent the account is maintained by a covered entity. So banks, credit unions, trust companies. Then there's a definition of associated third party, and this comes up in the context of if the bank feels that it would be prudent to contact an associated third party, family member of the customer, for example, or a guardian, then they could reach out and do that. So the people who would qualify as an associated third party would include a parent, spouse, adult, child, sibling, or other family member of a customer whom a covered entity reasonably believes is closely associated with the customer. An individual the customer has authorized to be contacted by the customer's covered entity. Co-owner, additional authorized signatory or beneficiary on an account, or an agent for the customer under a power of attorney, or a licensed attorney, trustee, conservator, guardian, or other fiduciary selected by a court or government agency to manage some or all of the financial affairs of the customer. So again, covered entity, bank, trust company, savings institution, credit union, and any subsidiaries or affiliates to the extent they provide financial services, and includes the directors, officers, employees of the entity. Customer is what you would think, the person who establishes, maintains, or is a beneficiary of an account with a covered entity, who owns, controls, or has a present or contingent legal or beneficial interest in funds held in the account, whether acting directly or through an agency, fiduciary, or representative. And then in terms of what constitutes financial exploitation for purposes of this provision, it means the wrongful or unauthorized taking, withholding, appropriation, transfer, expenditure, or use of a customer's money, assets, or property, or any act or omission by a person, including by a fiduciary or other representative of the customer, whether acting under a power of attorney, guardianship, conservatorship, trust, or similar authority that obtains or attempts to obtain control over the customer's money, assets, or property through deception, intimidation, coercion, or undue influence, for the purpose or effect of depriving the customer of the ownership, benefit of money, assets, property, or converts or misuses such property so as to deprive the customer of the ownership of these benefits. So, in terms of the protective action that the covered entities can take, if they reasonably believe that a customer is or has been a victim of financial exploitation or attempted financial exploitation, and such belief is based on information either individually observed or received from a state, local, or law enforcement agency, the covered entity may take one or more of the following measures to protect a customer's account: delay or refuse one or more transactions with or involving a customer, and there are limits in the amount of time the delay or refuse to permit the withdrawal or disbursement of funds contained in the customer's account, prevent a change in ownership of the account, prevent a transfer of funds from the account, refuse to comply with instructions given to the covered entity by an agent or person acting for or with an agent under a power of attorney signed or purported to have been signed by the customer, or prevent or change the designation of the beneficiary. So these are all the actions that the covered entity can take, but is not, as stated in subsection B, required to take protective action with regard to an account, but may use its sole discretion to determine whether such action is warranted based on the information available to it at the time. If the entity institutes a delay under this section, it expires at the earlier of 15 business days after the date they initiated the delay, or when the covered entity is satisfied that the transaction will not result in financial exploitation, or upon court order directing the release of funds. And then, unless otherwise directed by a court, the covered entity may extend the duration of delay for up to an additional 15 days based on reasonable belief that the financial exploitation of the customer may continue. And then any refusal, delay, or other action in good faith under this section shall not constitute, and then this is just basically a list of all of the kind of UCC banking provisions that basically say you have to do what the customer tells you to do, right? All the check clearing, just honor their transactions, so on and so forth. So the covered entity is not violating those provisions if it takes the protective actions here. That's what 1, 2, and 3 are basically saying. And then in terms of if the covered entity chooses to notify an associated third party, it can do so. If it determines that such disclosure is in the best interests of the customer, that the covered entity may choose not to notify if it believes that the third party is, was, or may be engaged in the financial exploitation. The disclosures to the third party shall be limited to only information necessary to convey its suspicion. And any disclosure is exempt from the privacy protections under Vermont law, and to the extent permitted under federal law. The immunity provision is, again, just protection for the covered entities for taking the actions authorized here. provided those acts or omissions are in good faith and do not amount to gross negligence or willful misconduct. Provisions of this chapter, this section are construed liberally. If there's any ambiguity. And that's pretty much it for the substantive provisions.
So I'm definitely supportive of moving this bill forward. I just want to ask if, Maria, did you write this from whole cloth, or is this from model legislation that we are trying to adopt in here in the state of Vermont?
Yeah, so there was a working group. I think Representative Brady mentioned a couple of working groups, one on Firstead and one on this. And I'm looking at Chris Delia because he was a member of the working group. And they had put together some information and provided it to me. I'm not exactly sure what the source of all of that information, so he can speak to that a little bit more specifically, and then how similar it is similar to other state laws and what's available.
There's a news story on the other night about a gentleman who had run into this very attractive young woman on the internet and over time invested his life savings. His son caught on, actually did the research. The story was they're not even sure she was real. They think she was a bot. And then we did have a lady come in who had been defrauded in one of those voting sites twice. She came in, send money. I'm just saving up so I come and be with you in the States. Would this allow a family member who was getting very concerned about somebody who was sending money to some person overseas on a dating site, which was a known scam, or did seem to be investing way more than was prudent with some entity on the internet? Would this allow them to go to the bank and say, look, I am really concerned that my mother or my father or my brother is getting themselves in a financial jam, and can you just put a hold on this? Well, I don't let them they send any more money until I have a chance to do the research and find out if this is a scam or real.
So it's an interesting question. This doesn't speak to third parties initiating contact. If the third party though, and bankers and credit unions can address it, if they have concerns, they can, I don't see why they couldn't go to a bank and convey their concerns. The bank can't share financial information. So there might be limitations there, but
give the bank a heads up.
they could give a heads up and then do their own, investigation, try to work with a family
Somebody
member.
wants to wire another
Ultimately-
$200,000 to Nigeria, that maybe they could put a hold on it.
Yeah, so it depends on the circumstances. I mean, family member, but can't control what family members do unless you think that some protective services are necessary, go to a court, but.
They are.
Yeah,
Isn't this bill within the confines of domestic abuse or?
not this,
The next.
Yes.
Or the next.
yes, this one could be anybody walking into a bank, and asking for some unusual money transaction. That raises concerns.
I mean, they do call if somebody comes in with a check you've written for a larger couple $100, and they don't look like your associate, they will call. They have called. Michelle, we are not taking, we were ahead of time and we took up the testimony from the Burlington Airport. And when we finish here, I think we're actually going to go home.
Okay, well, thank you for letting me know. You will see Patrick tomorrow online, or no,
Yes.
he'll be in person. actually.
Yes, we are not finished with the bill. We
No.
just took some testimony on Jen.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
So, these banking, the bank hold provisions would take effect immediately on passage. So you know that, and then for the next two sections are reporting provisions. Section 5 is with respect to the suspicious transactions. Basically, just asking the Commissioner of Financial Regulation to consult with representative from banks and credit, just to get a better understanding of the number of instances of suspicious transactions, the dollar amount, circumstances, whatever, collect that data and then report it to the standing committees of jurisdiction. That report will come back next year, January of 2027. And kind of a similar report with respect to core stat. Of course, it's much further out because that would take effect for 2028. Again, just regarding the utilization of the core step protections. Meeting with various stakeholders. And just frequency of core step claims, et cetera. Just data about implementation for step. So that's pretty much it.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
You know, it will again take a little while to sort our way through us, but one more witness might make this.
Might be a segue, but to the previous point, it definitely makes sense with mortgages and commercial loans. I'm surprised auto loans would still, because when I've ever taken out an auto loan out, my wife is going to be on that. She needs to be there with the other person. I mean, you can't do that online like credit card. So it makes a lot of sense to apply a credit card on collateralized debt. That's easy to take out, but it seems like auto loans, there's a lot of checks in the system before they give up that asset and sign somebody over. I'm not advocating to exclude out auto loans. I'm just surprised it hasn't been considered prior to now, but maybe our banker friend Chris Dealey can speak to that.
Okay. People do Chris with now or speak,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna go to Joe, who's been sitting here patiently. And then, do we have advocates? I'm sure we do.
Nobody's reached out.
Nobody has reached out.
AARP.
AARP, okay. And I know there's one lobbyist who's very interested, Gail, so maybe we could see if she's gonna help.
I got a sick 1-year-old, so I have to get my 3-year-old from daycare, I'm told, so I'll be listening.
They do horrible things if you don't pick children up on that. When you take.
About the curve.
All right.
Joe Valenti, Director of Policy at DFR. I'll be brief. I know you all would like to go home, and I can tell we won't get to the bottom of this topic today. But a few things I wanted to point out. First of all, so this bill is in response to the 2 studies that were in Act 23 last year, the DFR housekeeping bill. It was decided that they would both be combined into one bill. In-house commerce. For both of the studies, we met twice virtually with the stakeholders that were named. We did have a couple of additional parties that we invited for the second conversation based on feedback. We submitted draft reports for comment before we submitted them, and both of those were submitted here on January 15th. I'm happy to, they're on the legislative reports site, but I'll also reshare them with Charlotte so that you'll have access and you can peruse. Neither one of them is striking totally new ground here. The suspicious transaction hold laws exist in about 20-something states, and they vary in their scope and what they cover, what they don't. We also have suspicious transaction holds already
in the Vermont securities regulations for securities transactions. So that was another piece that we could rely on. In terms of coerced debt, Representative Branning had mentioned 7 states that have enacted laws on this topic in recent years. New York was the most recent. They passed a law last December. New York has an unusual process where the governor can sign a bill while asking the legislature to amend it after it's been signed. And so it was amended, and the new language, I think, was signed within the last month or two. So there were some revisions that are not in the report that we published. But New York has a law, Maine has a law, Connecticut, Texas, Minnesota, California. So it's a wide variety of states. I'll say on the coerced debt piece, they have taken a lot of different approaches in terms of what types of debts are covered. To the question about auto loans in particular, there was a witness in House Commerce from an auto dealer who had expressed some concerns with it. I think the challenge there, for example, Connecticut's law only applies to unsecured credit cards, and that is about as narrow as these loans get. But that means it's unsecured, it's credit cards only, it's not even including a personal loan or some other type of unsecured piece of it. I think the auto loans, which some states do cover, the rationale was that it is secured, but it is something, it is movable property that can be repossessed, it can be seized. It's also one of the largest categories of debt, along with credit cards, that most people have. And it is something where advocates have had particular experience, where people have had difficulties being coerced into auto loans. But I would say overall, in meeting with the study groups on both topics, there was a very clear consensus on suspicious transaction holds. We did not have consensus with the coerced debt language. We are comfortable with where the bill has landed, but we have been neutral on it to date. And it really comes down to this question, to use the Donald Rumsfeld term, of the unknown unknowns, in that a lot of these state laws are fairly new. We don't know at this point sort of how they're faring in terms of the number of claims. I think there is, I don't want to speak for other parties, but there is a concern that you could have a large number of people filing coerced debt claims that may or may not be legitimate. There may be instances of fraud. And, you know, if you're looking at it from a lending perspective, these could be fairly large, unexpected liabilities if you need to answer all of these claims. I think what we've heard from advocates is that the expectation is that the numbers are likely to be fairly limited. It's people who are in dire financial circumstances. I think the part of the sort of challenge here is some of these loans, particularly the unsecured loans, may have been written off anyway. And if it's possible to collect from a perpetrator, then maybe that's better than the status quo. But there are all of these different factors and variations that we got into in both reports. So I can stop there and take any questions that you might have.
Okay. So it's the first section that you're being neutral on, because we don't have enough of a track record to say that this couldn't be used fraudulently, or, you know, it could turn into a huge, if I guess if it's only going forward from the date of enactment, that kind of eliminates this idea that you get a huge backlog of unanticipated coerced debt.
Well, it's also the 2 year, I was not involved in determining the effective date.
Yeah.
But having an effective date that's 2 years out does mean that it gives all parties time to prepare.
Right.
And to see if circumstances change, or, I mean, I would like to think that if any one of these states, if they have seen a disastrous result, I mean, a lot of these laws, the oldest is from 2019, but a lot of them were in the last sort of 2 to 3 years, that if any of these states do see a dramatic result, or it seems to be working as intended, within the next year or two, we would know.
Is it possible that a lending institution could just put at the bottom, I certify that I am not being coerced, I'm doing this of my own free will?
I'm not an attorney, so I can't
You can't say that.
advise
but
on
I
how successful that would be. I know that's the point. That is a point that has been raised. I mean, there is also, there's the filing of the claim, and then it is up to the creditor to investigate and validate. And it's possible they may say this does not have sufficient documentation, and then they can continue collecting on that debt. They just wouldn't be able to transfer. So I think the other variation here that makes it complicated is it could be, it could be a new loan where someone is paying as agreed or not making payments. It could also be a debt and collections. It could be with any number of lenders, whether it's, state charter, national. You have it, which is also why we have those 2 study provisions for both parts of the bill at the end. And both of those, they look a little bit clunky because it's requiring us to consult with stakeholders. It's literally because we would not be able to get the data from the institutions that are not in our jurisdiction. And so we sort of have to crowdsource how both of those provisions are going by talking to the people who are privy to that information.
Okay. So,
We're gonna be in 7 days, so everybody might want to straighten their ties or
all
whatnot.
right, everybody sit up straight. Can I put my eyeball up? All right, okay, so there's a risk either way. I mean, the risk is on the consumer one way, that there's going to be coerced debt. There's risk on the lenders that they are going to lose money, basically not be able to collect debt, which may result in their being a little more cautious about debt. Probably the big one would be credit cards, which it's really easy to run up a whole lot of debt in really short order. And nobody's really, as long as I pay $25 a month, I can, no. I forget what my credit line is now, but I can run up a whole lot of debt, paying off very little. I would say it would be the credit card companies that would be most at risk here. Were they part of the discussion?
So a lot of, there are probably some credit cards that are issued by Vermont-based institutions. I would expect a lot of those are coming from national institutions that are not based here.
I think the biggest risk is to the people who are the victims of abuse and that are being coerced into taking debt because of their circumstances as an abused spouse or partner or, abused. As I said earlier, and I think it's really important that we hear, hearing from them about the instances where this has happened. I think this is a growing problem and their lives are being destroyed. One, because of the abuse, and then on top of that, the financial burden of all of this coerced debt. And so obviously we want to have protections in place to make sure that the financial institutions don't incur more debt than necessary. But my primary concern is with the potential victims who are in this horrible abusive situation.
Or being trafficked.
I mean, we're talking about, in some cases, young girls who are then put in this position where they're, adding to the abuse, they're adding financial obligations on top of it. It's an awful situation.
We will hear from the advocates and we will hear from the problems. I think we also need to make sure that we don't make it more difficult for everybody else to.
Well, I think in a lot of
Acquire.
cases, this gets written off as bad debt and
Right.
that, so they're not protected anyway. And so we want to make, no, I mean, the company is
Right, but
writing
if
it off
the,
as
if
bad
the
debt.
victim is paying off that debt,
Yes, yes, I mean, if they're paying it off, but in some cases, they're put into so much debt, they can't
Can't
pay
pay
it
it
off.
What happens to the victim's credit rating in all of this? Does that get wiped?
Yeah,
Was that was in there?
that was in there, that gets
Right, so it would be flagged as disputed when the claim is filed, and then if that claim is successful, then the creditor would request that information be removed. Again, the structuring of that is because Fair Credit Reporting Act preemption is a very complicated area, and so it's difficult for us to be able to dictate what credit reporting companies can or should do in different situations. But the financial institutions or the lending institutions that are regularly reporting are the ones in the driver's seat with regard to what is reported.
But this does require that they report to the credit.
Right.
Bureaus. Okay.
Just, I completely agree with you, and that's where I was going at the credit cards, is I think it's incredibly easy to open up a credit card, that if I could see the abusers using those opportunities to exploit. I just don't know if car loans are as easy to open up without somebody physically being present, signing off on. But I'm fine with car loans still being in there, I'm not trying to advocate for it, just.
As I said, I know someone who the price of domestic peace was a new pickup truck every year.
And
They both went, they both signed off, but there was definitely coercion going on.
And part of the challenge here too is that these are, these situations sort of fall between the gaps because, for example, you have a very clear case of identity theft. You have no idea where this debt came from. No idea who took it out, but you see something or you're getting statements. Right. We have procedures for identity theft already. We have procedures for other kinds of situations. We don't have something for, well, technically your name is on this, but it's really, but you were coerced into signing.
Well, that's why this bill's really exciting, because we get the opportunity to protect victims, and I'm really excited about that.
So we will hear from everyone. And then we will vote. Or amend and vote. Okay,
Sounds good.
Are we doing more?
anything else you think we should know?
Not for today. I will make sure that you have copies of the reports.
Okay, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Because this is the first time this committee has dealt with it at all. So it is all new to us. I think that went through the House and helped them well.
This year, and then they punted it
Yeah,
up.
well, this bill did, but the,
House Commerce.
yeah,
I looked at it.
and so it didn't come here last year. I don't remember it going through health and welfare, so I'm not sure where it went.
Well, last year, we asked for the reports.
Right.
Yes, the miscellaneous DFR bill, I remember
Okay.
doing that. That was in here, okay.
So thank you, committee.